Hello, welcome to the Capital Employed podcast. For this episode, I had the pleasure of talking with Mark Tobin. Mark is the founder of Coffee Microcaps, a media events company and subscription newsletter. The focus of Coffee Microcaps is on highlighting quality microcaps listed on the ASX Australian Stock Exchange. In this episode, Mark gives an overview of the type of companies that are showcased in the Coffee Microcaps newsletter as well as at the virtual events. He also talks about two quality microcaps he feels have great long-term potential. I really enjoyed listening to him and I think you will too. So without further interruption, please enjoy my conversation with Mark. Thanks Mark for coming onto the show. For listeners who may not be familiar, what is Coffee Microcaps?
So Coffee Microcaps is a media and events company. We generally try and shine a spotlight on good ASX microcap companies. And I guess my definition or our definition of a microcap is anything that's capped under 300 million Australian dollars. I'm not sure on the exchange rate what that would be in pounds, but I think it'd probably be somewhere around maybe the 200 million pound mark. And pre-COVID, we used to run investment conferences where we'd have 10 to 12 companies come in and present in the day. I also run a subscription newsletter where I profile one interesting microcap stock every week for my subscribers.
And what type of industries and companies do you focus on?
So I have a catch-all term that I use, which I say industrial microcaps, but it actually, it's more broader than, let's say, the industrial sector. It encompasses basically every sector outside of the resources sector and the biotechnology sector. And the reason I do that is resources in Australia is quite a large part of the market, both at the large cap side with names like BHP and Rio and Fortescue Metals that people, I'm sure, globally would probably be aware of, but also at the smaller end, there's a lot of junior resources companies, and they have a large number of ways, I guess, to communicate their story. So I don't, really focus on trying to get their story out there. And biotechnology is another one where, I find it, very volatile on the upside and the downside. I prefer businesses, which have revenues are profitable or close to profitable, but still down that smaller end, which have kind of got a decent growth profile in front of them. So it's everything except junior resources and biotechnology companies.
And how do you find these companies? Do you use a screen or is it more from a qualitative background?
Screening, I find very hit and miss. I'm not sure what the experience is in the UK market, but I find generally for microcaps, if you're running screens, the data can be very hit and miss. I sometimes run a screen with 2 or 3 companies I have in mind, and I'll find one of them doesn't come up in the screen, even though I know the kind of financials well enough that it should show up. So a lot of it is looking at the announcements that come out on the ASX, on the stock exchange every day. So the first thing I'll do is maybe once a day, I'll look through kind of all the announcements that have been made. And that generally throws up, new companies to look at or refreshes my memory on old ones. And I've got a watch list that I've built up over time that this stage I think has got about 250 microcaps that broadly fit into under 300 million market cap, in revenue, profitable or close to profitable, and outside the resources and biotechnology space. So from within that 250 cohort comes ideas for the newsletter. And all of these companies are at various stages of development, and some I'm like watching and they announce something, I think, they're probably another 3, 6 or 12 months away from being where I think I can write them up, but it's just good to have them on the watch list and check in on them from time to time.
Can you talk us through 1 or 2 companies that you have recently featured in your newsletter that you think over the long term will produce really good results? What's the thesis for investing in those companies?
one of the companies that has done really well lately, and I think it's definitely trading on a premium, but I think it deserves that given the way the management team have executed over the last 3 or 4 years, is a company called Energy One. So the ticker symbol is EOL, so Echo Oscar Lima. So basically they've got a trading software business, but for the energy market. So for large generators and large consumers of electricity or gas, they provide the software for both the generators to sell that energy and for large customers to get their electricity needs met. So when I say large customers, I'm talking about McDonald's UK, for example, or large industrial users, aluminium smelters, for example. It helps them like match up the price at various different contract lengths, because they generally contract out on a 3, 6, 12, 24-month basis. The business had been primarily focused in Australia, a little bit offshore in New Zealand and Singapore, and a little bit in the Philippines. They kind of tested the waters internationally a little bit. But in Australia, they basically contract 50% of all electricity traded in Australia. So they're a dominant market player in Australia. More recently, they bought business in France, which has given them foothold, I guess, into the European market, which they're very keen on. And they did a small acquisition in the UK, but I think with Brexit, they're more focused now on the European market, and they're slowly bringing their products and services to the European market with their French acquisition. And they've, over the last 2 or 3 years, have very cleverly expanded out from just the trading. They bought a few other businesses where, you can do like energy analytics and reports and kind of big data stuff for both the producers and for the consumers. It's a software as a service type model, enterprise level. Basically a lot of these companies, they need to use some form of trading software. And if EOL can get their package or system in there, it's going to be used on a day-to-day basis. They haven't really been affected by, let's say, COVID. They're not really affected by economic cycles, because it's intrinsic to the operation of that business. So it's kind of something they can't do without. So that'd be one. A second one I would probably call out is a business called SDI. They are in the dental products business. They're actually a world leader in dental products. So that would be things like, tooth whitening, equipment for dentists. They previously were the world leader in amalgam. So if some of your older listeners will remember, when you used to get a filling, it used to be kind of a silver color. The more modern one is a white amalgam that kind of blends in with your teeth, and it's actually kind of quite difficult to see whether you've got a filling or not. But as they've transitioned from selling the old school amalgam, which is still actually quite widely used in a lot of places, especially in South America, parts of the US, their sales have been falling, while the new product, the white amalgam, has been rising, and that balance has been tricky for them to manage. So they've kind of been going through this transition phase between an old product and a newer product, and they've been doing a lot of R&D and releasing a lot of new products to expand, I guess, the products that a particular dentist might take from them. They're nearly through that process. Once the old amalgam sales have basically gone down to a small proportion of the overall sales, I think it'll get back to where it was 3 or 4 years ago, when it was a very solid business, growing internationally, dividend paying. It was definitely one of the leading kind of microcaps in the Australian market. So it's a bit of a kind of a fallen angel that's been through a bit of a transition period. But underneath it all, I think there's a very solid business within there. Family-run business, founded by the Cheatham family, founded by the father. He's since moved to the chairman role and has now been run by his daughter, Samantha.
It's a really interesting stock. I'm just looking at the graph now. It does seem to be building up momentum again.
Yeah, I think that's one where people are sitting on the sidelines, waiting for this transition to kind of end. But I think it's getting, it's every kind of reporting period. Normally, most companies in Australia work on a June year end because that's the tax year end in Australia. So just coming up now, we'll have the first half results. So from June to December, which are going to be all reported now in February for the vast majority of ASX listed companies. We'll probably see amalgam sales down again, but it'll be an even smaller percentage of total sales. And as I said, they've invested a lot in R&D over the last few years and brought a lot of new products to market to, I guess, try and increase, their relevance to dentists and just be a bigger part of the dental practice in terms of products that they supply in there.
Thanks for talking us through those two stocks. Apart from annual reports, do you read much? And if so, what is the most recent book you have read?
Yeah, I read a lot. I'm not a big fiction reader. I tend to like reading non-fiction, a lot of business books where you're learning. The most recent book I read that I really enjoyed was Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, where he really talks about startups and, what you need to kind of be a true disruptor. A lot of marketing and goes around with new businesses saying, they're a disruptor and they're going to revolutionize markets and the big old incumbent players that are in there. But, I took a lot of good points out of, Peter Thiel's book about, what you need to be a pure disruptor and what you need to succeed. And for anybody, I guess, who doesn't know Peter Thiel, he was the founder of PayPal. He was the first institutional investor in Facebook. And he's currently the CEO of Planeteer, which listed on the NYSE, was it the NYSE or the NASDAQ just before Christmas, which is his latest venture, which is big data, analytics, cybersecurity. They do a lot of work for governments and big corporates around data and security. So, he's been around Silicon Valley for a long time, and he had some very interesting points. It was a book I enjoyed immensely.
Every time I've seen Peter Thiel do talks on YouTube, I've always been very impressed. He's a very very interesting guy to listen to, and comes across a very sharp mind. No,
definitely very, very sharp. I think one of the best, when you mentioned YouTube, I think one of the best ones he did is a Stanford lecture where he talks about monopolies and competition. Well, it's well worth looking up that presentation if anybody wants to watch him on YouTube.
Where can people find out more about you and Coffee Microcaps?
So probably the best place to find out about me is on Twitter. I'm a big FinTwit person, so the handle is capital C Microcaps. That's probably the best place to get in touch with me. I also have a YouTube channel called Coffee Microcaps, and on the YouTube channel is where we've been posting recordings of our online events that we've been doing now since we can't do in-person events due to COVID. I run Coffee Microcaps morning meeting where we have two companies in and they kind of present their story, and we do a little bit of Q&A. That happens every second Thursday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Sydney time. And we've done 18 of those since the kind of start of COVID. And if listeners are looking for a flavour of, some of the ASX microcaps that I look at on a daily basis, that'd be a good place to go and look. EOL is one of those who have presented in the past. If you search back through the videos, they were number 10 or 12, somewhere around there. SDI I haven't been able to get in, but hopefully after they report results in February, maybe they'll come and join us.
How is the COVID situation in Australia? Are you hopeful of maybe having an in-person physical conference at some point this year?
Australia has just literally in the last day or two approved the Pfizer vaccine, and they're hoping to start rolling out in the middle of February. I'm hoping to do another in-person conference at the end of October 2021, but that is all based on the vaccine rollout and where we are with COVID and travel arrangements. I mean, one of the biggest differences between the UK and Australia is, the individual states within Australia, have been locking down their state borders to other parts of Australia. So, there's been lots of situations where travel was open between two states. Then there's a flare up in COVID, and then they shut the border between the two states, and people have been stuck on the wrong side of the border internally in Australia. I mean, Western Australia hasn't really opened its border to the whole of Australia since the COVID pandemic, really took off in earnest in March 2020. So until all of that is well clear, the chances of running a conference, I'd say, are maybe slim, but hopeful at this point for October 2021, which lines up nicely with the results calendar in Australia. So as I say, June is most companies' year end, which lines up with the tax year. So they report their full year results and the annual reports come out in August/September. So October is a good year because you've got the most recent kind of full year results, and then November is kind of a month that's dedicated to the AGMs, which follow on then from the year end.
Fingers crossed that comes to fruition.
Yeah, hopefully. But in the meantime, we'll continue on with the online events, which have actually got great support. I've been pleasantly surprised of how engaged people are with it. How much interest there's been in it. It surprised me, I guess, how quickly people are, willing to adapt to the online format as opposed to the physical in-person format.
Okay, Mark, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to listen to you. Hopefully we can get you back on in the future to talk about a few more Australian microcaps.
No, yeah, hopefully we can do it again, maybe the latter end of this year, and hopefully, between the results coming out in February and the results in August, I'll have uncovered maybe one or two more interesting gems for you.
That would be brilliant. Okay, thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks, Jon.